The mother-in-law humiliates her son's wife by throwing wine on her in front of the entire elite. But she has no idea that the simple girl is the CEO who will close an $800 million merger that very night. The stain on the dress becomes the final blow that shatters the matriarch's pride. If you enjoy stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. The Bohemian crystal glass flew through the air in a precise trajectory, and Madison barely had time to blink before the ruby liquid exploded against her white dress. The red wine, a $1,500 bottle of Chateau Margaux, ran down the Italian silk like fresh blood, staining the fabric a deep red. The sound of the glass shattering on the Carrara marble floor echoed through the ballroom of the Astor family's mansion on the Upper East Side of New York City, cutting through the conversations and making every head turn. Constance Astor remained with her arm extended, her wrist still trembling from the force with which she had hurled the drink. Her fingers, covered in emerald and diamond rings, glittered under the check crystal chandeliers, and her face, stretched by decades of cosmetic procedures, twisted into a mask of contempt that no surgery could disguise. The silence that fell over the room was thick, heavy, suffocating. The 150 guests at Richard Astor's official engagement party paused mid-sentence and mid-sip of their Dom Perignon champagne to witness the spectacle. Madison didn't move. She didn't raise her hands to wipe her wet face. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't retreat a single step. Her dark brown eyes, almost black under the golden light, fixed on Constance with a calmness that was more chilling than the ballroom's central air conditioning. It was the serenity of someone who had faced boardrooms full of powerful men, trying to intimidate her, of someone who had negotiated $100 million contracts without flinching, of someone who knew exactly the weight of her own worth. Richard appeared by his wife's side in seconds, his face burning with shame. His trembling hands pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of his Armani tuxedo as he muttered incoherent apologies, trying to blot the wine staining Madison's face. She could feel his desperation, the helplessness of a man trapped between the woman he loved and the mother who had controlled him since birth. "Mother, for God's sake," Richard said, his voice choked, trying to pull Madison away from the accusing stares that surrounded them. The guests whispered behind their glasses and fans, some pretending not to see anything, while others made a point of turning their faces away in disdain. Madison recognized these people, the New York elite who frequented the same clubs, the same parties, the same art auctions, old-money families who measured human value by surname and bank account. "Don't you dare give me orders, Richard August," Constance snapped, her voice echoing through the hall, with the authority of one who was always obeyed. She took a step toward her son, her Oscar de la Renta couture gown brushing the floor. Her contact lens blue eyes, as artificial as her sympathy, fixed on Madison with a venomous glare before returning to Richard. "This party isn't just your engagement. It's the pre-celebration of this family's salvation. In 1 hour, the representatives from the Horizon conglomerate will arrive to finalize the merger that will prevent everything your grandfather built from being auctioned off." Madison felt Richard's hand tighten on hers, but she didn't respond to the gesture. She was too busy watching Constance, studying every micro-expression on that face, desperately trying to maintain its composure. The Astor matriarch was sweating under her heavy makeup, even with the air conditioning at full blast. There was panic beneath that facade of arrogance, and Madison knew panic when she saw it. "Horizon Investments," Constance continued, raising her voice for all to hear, "is about to invest $800 million in Astor Holdings, a capital injection that will not only save our operations but will catapult us into a new era of prosperity." She paused dramatically, her eyes sweeping the room before, returning to Madison with renewed disdain. "And I will not allow a nameless, family-less opportunist with nothing but a public university degree to ruin this moment with her inadequate presence." The insult was calculated, precise, designed to cut deep. Madison saw Richard's face pale, saw the shame and anger warring within him. Some guests let out scandalized gasps, others chuckled quietly. A woman with gray hair commented loudly enough for everyone to hear that she always knew Richard had married beneath his station. Madison finally moved, not to confront Constance, not to respond to the insults. She simply released Richard's hand gently and took a step back, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble. Her wine-stained dress hung heavily against her body, but she wore it as if it were armor, not a mark of shame. "Where do you think you're going?" Constance demanded, her voice rising an octave. Madison stopped but didn't turn around immediately. "I'm not the one who's thinking, Mrs. Astor," Madison replied in a soft, almost gentle voice that was somehow more intimidating than any shout. "I'm merely following your implicit suggestion to withdraw." "It wasn't a suggestion," Constance declared, her rings flashing as she pointed to the door leading to the service area. "It was an order. Go clean yourself up in the kitchen with the other staff. I don't want you here when the Horizon executives arrive. You are a stain on this family's reputation, and I will not allow your embarrassing presence to frighten away investors who represent our last hope." The entire ballroom was watching now, not even feigning politeness. It was entertainment, drama, the kind of scandal that would fuel conversations at lunches at the Metropolitan Club for months. Richard tried to protest again, but his voice came out weak, impotent. Madison looked at her husband, and for a moment something passed between them. It wasn't disappointment, not anger. It was something more complex, a silent communication their years of marriage had forged. "It's all right, Richard," Madison said softly. "I'll wait there. Take care of your mother. She seems very stressed." The last sentence was laced with an irony so subtle that only a few caught it, but those who did felt a shiver run down their spines. Madison walked toward the side door that led to the mansion's backstage, her posture erect, each step measured and controlled. The wine still dripped from her dress, leaving small red drops on the marble floor like a trail of breadcrumbs in a dark forest. She didn't look back, didn't give Constance the satisfaction of seeing her shaken or humiliated. In the service corridors of the mansion, far from the golden glow of the main hall, Madison found the staff watching her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The head housekeeper, a 60-year-old woman named Eleanor, approached with clean towels and an expression of silent solidarity. The other maids whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval of the scene they had witnessed through the ajar doors. "Let me help you, Mrs. Madison," Eleanor offered, holding out the towels. "We can get a clean dress from Mrs. Astor's closet, something for you to change into." Madison accepted the towels and cleaned her face, but when Eleanor mentioned changing clothes, she paused. "No, thank you, Eleanor, I'll stay like this." The housekeeper looked confused but didn't question her. There was something in Madison's expression that discouraged questions, a determination that transformed the wine stain from a symbol of humiliation into something different, something Eleanor couldn't name, but which made her feel that maybe, just maybe, Madison wasn't the victim everyone imagined. Madison blotted the wine from her face and neck, but left the dress as it was. She walked to a narrow window overlooking the property's south garden, where a private helipad had been built years ago when the Astor's business was still prosperous enough to justify such an extravagance. The circular structure was now covered in a thin layer of dead leaves and dust, abandoned like so many other things in that family. From a discreet pocket in her ruined dress, Madison pulled out a cell phone. It wasn't the gold crystal-encrusted iPhone that most women in that social circle carried. It was a common, discreet device, the kind of phone that would go unnoticed anywhere. Her fingers flew over the screen with the precision of someone who typed important messages dozens of times a day. "Authorized landing on the south helipad. Coordinates already sent. Arrival in 15 minutes. Initiate protocol." Madison pressed send and put the phone back in her pocket. Through the window, she could see the lights of the main hall reflecting on the meticulously manicured garden, could hear the distant murmur of conversations returning to normal now that the show was over. Eleanor returned with a glass of ice water. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the housekeeper asked, her voice full of genuine concern. "In all the years I've worked here, I've never seen Mrs. Astor so." She hesitated, searching for the right word. So cruel. Madison accepted the water and took a sip, her eyes still fixed on the garden outside. "She's desperate, Eleanor. Desperate people do terrible things. It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation." Madison turned to face the housekeeper. "Tell me, you know the family's financial situation well." It wasn't a question. And Eleanor seemed surprised by the directness. Well, the staff talks, ma'am. They say if today's contract isn't signed, everything will be lost. The properties, the companies, everything. The housekeeper lowered her voice. They say the bank already has orders to start foreclosure proceedings tomorrow morning if the $800 million doesn't hit the account. Madison nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. And they think Horizon Investments is their only salvation. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. Mrs. Astor has spent months trying to close this deal. She told Mr. Richard that this is the most important day in the family's history since his grandfather founded the company. From the main hall elevated, animated voices now drifted. Constance was playing her role as the perfect hostess, laughing too loudly, gesturing extravagantly. Madison could picture the scene without needing to see it. The matriarch circulating among the guests, ensuring everyone knew about the great merger about to happen, building a narrative of triumph that would erase years of mismanagement and disastrous decisions. A distant sound began to grow, a deep hum that cut through the New York night air. Madison smiled for the first time since the wine had stained her dress. The helicopter was approaching. Eleanor looked out the window, confused. "Is someone arriving?" she asked. "But the mansion is already full." "Just a few important guests," Madison replied, her voice neutral. "Very important." She left the window and walked back into the corridor, her steps echoing in the narrow space. Eleanor followed, still holding the towels as if she didn't know what to do with them. In the main ballroom, the sound of the helicopter had also been noticed. Conversations dwindled as guests looked at each other, confused. Constance frowned, trying to keep her smile fixed as she approached, the large windows overlooking the garden. Through the glass, everyone could see the helicopter's lights descending toward the abandoned helipad, its rotors kicking up a cloud of dry leaves and dust. "Who is it?" one of the guests asked, a bejeweled woman who had already had too much champagne. "Constance, were you expecting someone else?" The matriarch didn't answer immediately, her mind working quickly to process the unexpected arrival. She turned to Richard, who was pale near the bar, holding a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking. "Richard, do you know who—" Constance began, but she was interrupted as the main doors of the ballroom opened. 3 people entered, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in immaculate business suits that screamed corporate power. They carried black leather briefcases and moved with the precise confidence of people accustomed to walking into rooms and changing destinies. Constance dropped her glass on a nearby table and practically ran toward the newcomers, her face transforming into a mask of professional charm. "Good evening. Welcome. I am Constance Astor, and this is the family residence. You must be from Horizon Investments. We were expecting you. Where is your CEO? I must greet him personally." The tallest man, with perfectly combed grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses, looked at Constance with an unreadable expression. "Dr. Paul Mason, CFO of Horizon. This is Dr. Julia Sanders, our Chief Legal Officer, and this is Dr. Frederick Cole, Chief Operating Officer." He didn't extend his hand, and Constance noticed the coldness but tried to ignore it. "It's an honor to have you here," Constance continued, gesturing to the opulent ballroom as if showing off a trophy. "As you can see, we've prepared a special party to celebrate our partnership, but I would like to meet your CEO before we begin the formalities. Is he arriving in another helicopter?" "The CEO is already here," Dr. Julia replied, her voice cool and professional. "In fact, we believe the hostess is already acquainted with our leadership." Constance blinked, confused. "Impossible. I know every important guest at this party, and I can assure you that no CEO of an investment conglomerate is among them." Dr. Frederick exchanged a look with the other 2 executives, and something passed between them, a silent communication that sent a chill down Constance's spine. "Perhaps you should check again, ma'am," he suggested, his tone polite but with an edge that sounded dangerously like irony. It was at that moment that Madison emerged from the side door, leading to the service area. The entire ballroom turned to look at her, and a murmur of surprise and disapproval rippled through the guests. She was still in the wine-stained dress, the white silk ruined by the red that now seemed like an intentional part of the design, an avant-garde fashion statement, or a battle scar. Constance whirled around, her face twisting in rage. "I told you to stay in the kitchen. Don't you dare come back here and embarrass—" But her voice died as she saw what happened next. The three executives from Horizon, those powerful people Constance had spent months trying to impress, turned as one body toward Madison. And then, to the absolute shock of everyone in the ballroom, they bowed. The bow from the three Horizon executives was deep, synchronized, a gesture of absolute respect that cut through the ballroom's air like a sharp blade. Dr. Paul Mason bowed his head first, followed immediately by Dr. Julia Sanders and Dr. Frederick Cole. They remained that way for 3 full seconds, long enough for every person present to process what they were witnessing, long enough for Constance's world to begin to crumble. "Good evening, CEO Madison," Dr. Paul said, straightening up and opening his leather briefcase. "We apologize for the delay, but the air traffic over New York was complicated tonight. LaGuardia's control tower took a while to clear our corridor." He extended a black briefcase identical to his own toward Madison, completely ignoring Constance, who had frozen in the middle of the ballroom with her mouth slightly agape. Madison crossed the space between the side door and the center of the hall with measured steps. The silence was so dense that the sound of her heels against the marble echoed like drum beats. All eyes were fixed on her, on the bowing executives, on the briefcase being extended. The guests who minutes before had laughed at her humiliation now looked like statues of salt, trapped between disbelief and the growing horror of understanding what was happening. "No problem, Dr. Mason," Madison replied, her calm voice filling the ballroom. "I was busy, anyway." She accepted the briefcase and opened it, revealing densely printed documents, financial spreadsheets, complex charts. Her eyes scanned the pages with the speed of someone accustomed to processing critical information in seconds. "I see you've incorporated the changes I requested yesterday. Very good." Richard had dropped his whiskey glass, which rolled across a table and fell to the floor without anyone seeming to notice or care. His face was ashen, his wide eyes fixed on his wife. "Madison," he began, his voice coming out hoarse, almost inaudible. "What? How? You never—" "I never told you," Madison completed, finally looking at her husband. Her eyes met his, and there was something there, a mixture of affection and sadness. "It was never the right time. Or maybe I was, waiting to see how far your family would go." She shifted her gaze from Richard to Constance, who remained paralyzed 10 feet away. "I think now I know." Constance finally found her voice, though it came out trembling and an octave higher than normal. "This is ridiculous. You can't be at some kind of trick." She looked desperately at the executives. "You've been deceived. This woman is a fraud, an opportunist who tricked my son. She doesn't even have a decent degree. She went to a public university." Dr. Julia Sanders, a woman in her 40s with a piercing gaze, turned slowly to Constance. The coldness in her expression could freeze hell. "Mrs. Astor, I suggest you be careful with your next words. Madison Taylor is the founder and CEO of Horizon Investments Americas. She has built a portfolio of $23 billion from scratch over the last 8 years. Her undergraduate degree in economics from UC Berkeley, the public university you so disparagingly mentioned, was followed by an MBA in finance from the Wharton School and a master's in corporate strategy from the London Business School. She is considered one of the 50 most influential women in the Latin American financial market." Each of Dr. Julia's words fell upon the ballroom like heavy stones. Guests began to whisper among themselves, some discreetly pulling out their phones to search. Constance opened and closed her mouth several times, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Her face, already pale under the heavy makeup, took on an almost greenish hue. 8 years, Madison repeated softly, more to herself than to others. 8 years building Horizon from nothing while everyone here saw me as Richard's wife, the inadequate spouse, the gold digger. She smiled, but there was no joy in it, only a bitter, tired irony. "You know what's funny? I could have revealed who I was at any time. I could have shown up to one of these parties with a helicopter, security, assistance. But I wanted to see. I wanted to understand who Richard really was, when no one was trying to impress him for my money or position." Richard took a trembling step toward his wife, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Madison, I didn't know. You have to believe me. I never imagined. If I had known—" He stopped, realizing that anything he said would sound pathetic. And it was pathetic, the raw truth that he had married a woman, loved a woman, without ever really trying to know her beyond the surface. "I know you didn't know, Richard," Madison said, and there was genuineness in her voice. "You thought I worked as a freelance financial consultant. It wasn't a lie, technically. I do consult, just on a slightly larger scale than you imagined." She closed the briefcase and held it against her chest, over the wine stain that now looked like a battle decoration. "The trips I took, the nights I spent working in my office, you thought I was building a modest career. And I was. It's just that this career was worth billions." Constance finally regained some composure, though her voice still trembled. "This is impossible. If you're as important as you claim, why would you hide it? Why would you subject yourself to my—" She paused, realizing that admitting her past humiliations would be confessing her own faults. "Why would you act like an ordinary person?" Madison turned to face her fully for the first time since returning to the ballroom. "Because ordinary people are real, Mrs. Astor. Ordinary people aren't constantly calculating advantages, measuring net worth, weighing connections. I wanted to know if Richard loved me for who I am, not for what I own." She looked around the room, at the guests who were still staring at her, dumbfounded. "And I wanted to see how your family would treat me, if they thought I had nothing to offer but myself." "The answer to that question is on my dress," Madison said, gesturing to the red stain. "It's in the words you used. Opportunist, nameless, familyless, gold digger." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the softness. "You threw wine on me, sent me to the kitchen as if I were an unwanted servant, in front of 150 people. And why? Because in your mind, I had no value without an old surname or an inherited bank account." Dr. Frederick stepped forward, his expression grave. "CEO Madison, shall we proceed with the meeting? We have the finalized documents and the deadline set by the financial institution expires at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. It is now 10:45 p.m. We have just over 10 hours. Madison nodded, but she didn't open the briefcase again, not immediately. "First, I think everyone here deserves to understand the full situation." She looked at Constance. "You said Horizon was about to invest $800 million in Astor Holdings, correct? That it would save the family legacy?" Constance could only nod, her pride in tatters but her desperate need still evident in every line of her face. "Technically," Madison continued, "it's not an investment. It's an acquisition. Horizon isn't injecting capital to save the company. It's buying the entire company. Every share, every property, every asset. The $800 million will pay off the outstanding debts and give the Astor family enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, if managed wisely. But Astor Holdings will cease to exist as an independent entity. It will become a subsidiary of Horizon." The shock of this revelation ripped through the ballroom. Several guests let out audible gasps. Richard staggered, leaning against a nearby chair. Constance, however, remained strangely still, as if some part of her already knew, already expected salvation to come with an unbearable price. "My lawyer," Constance whispered, "told me it was a merger, a partnership." "Your lawyer was being kind," Dr. Julia said coldly, "or he was trying to make the situation seem less humiliating. The reality is that Astor Holdings is technically insolvent. The debts exceed the liquid assets by $400 million. The banks have given you until tomorrow morning to present a solution, or they will begin foreclosure proceedings. Everything will be auctioned off. This mansion, the commercial properties in Soho, the apartments on Park Avenue, the remaining shares in subsidiary companies, everything." Richard looked up, and Madison saw tears glistening in his eyes. "How did we get to this point?" he asked no one in particular. "My grandfather built this empire. My father expanded it. How could we lose everything?" Madison felt a tightness in her chest. She loved Richard, she really did. He was kind, smart in many ways, a good man trapped in a family that had molded him in the wrong directions. "Mismanagement," she said softly. "Risky investments without proper analysis. aggressive expansion without reserve capital, loans upon loans to maintain an unsustainable standard of living. She looked at Constance. And pride. A lot of pride. Pride that prevented you from seeking outside help until it was too late. Constance finally moved, taking slow steps toward Madison. Her face was a wreck. Now the mask of superiority completely shattered. You knew. This whole time you knew we were sinking, and you said nothing. You just watched as we struggled. I didn't know the details until 3 months ago, Madison corrected. That's when my team brought Astor Holdings to me as a potential acquisition. They didn't know about my personal connection to the family. When I saw the name, when I read the reports, I understood everything. Her voice grew quieter. And then I had a choice. I could have told Richard immediately, offered help, revealed who I was, or I could wait and see how you would treat me if you thought I had nothing to offer. And you chose to test us, Constance said bitterly, to humiliate us. I didn't plan tonight's humiliation, Mrs. Astor. That was all you. Madison gestured to her stained dress. You made that choice on your own. She paused, searching for the right words, wanted to understand if there was any redemption possible in this family. If the love Richard claimed to have for me was strong enough to overcome his loyalty to the hypocrisy you've built. The guests were now whispering openly, some already starting to discreetly head for the exits. Tonight's scandal would feed New York high society for years. The matriarch Constance Astor humiliating the billionaire CEO who would become the owner of everything her family possessed. It was the kind of story that destroyed reputations and ended social careers. Richard finally found the strength to approach Madison, stopping just inches from her. His eyes were red, but he was no longer crying. What happens now? He asked simply. Are you going through with the acquisition? Are you going to take everything from us? Madison looked at the man she had married, the man who had loved her without ever truly knowing her. That depends, she replied. It depends on you and your family. It depends on whether you are willing to accept reality and work within it, or if you will continue to live in fantasies of greatness that no longer exist. Constance advanced, her eyes burning with renewed fury. You have no right. This company was built over 3 generations. You can't just... The words died in her throat as Madison raised a hand. I can and I will, Madison said with a firmness that allowed no argument. But how, on what terms, and what role your family will play in the company's future, that is still up for discussion. She opened the briefcase again and flipped to a specific section. The documents here are clear. Horizon acquires 100% of the common and preferred stock, assumes all debts, pays $800 million, of which $400 million goes directly to the banks, $200 million to suppliers and smaller creditors, and $200 million remains with the Astor family as compensation for the sale. $200 million, Richard murmured. That's less than a quarter of what the company was worth 5 years ago. It's what it's worth today, Dr. Paul corrected dryly. In fact, we're being generous. A forced liquidation would yield perhaps $150 million after paying all priority creditors. Madison closed the briefcase and held it firmly. But there are additional clauses that need to be discussed. Leadership changes, organizational restructuring, and, she paused significantly, personal compensation for executives who accept smooth transitions versus those who resist. What does that mean? Constance asked, though from the tone of her voice, she already knew. It means, Madison said, that you, Mrs. Astor, are terminated. Your position as chairwoman of the board ends the moment I sign these documents. Richard looked shocked, his eyes darting between his mother and his wife. Madison, you can't. I can and I will, Madison replied, her voice cutting off any argument before it could form. Richard, you need to understand something fundamental. This is not an emotional negotiation. It's not about revenge or hurt feelings. It's business, pure and simple. And in business, incompetent leadership has no place. She turned to face Constance directly. In the last 8 years, since you took over as chairwoman after your husband passed away, Astor Holdings has lost 62% of its market value. You entered into 6 different ventures without proper risk analysis. 5 failed completely. Constance opened her mouth to protest, but Madison continued, relentless. You took out loans at predatory rates to maintain a standard of living the company could no longer support. This mansion costs $120,000 a month just in maintenance and staff. The 3 imported cars in the garage, the trips to Miami and Paris, the weekly dinners at Daniel. All financed with credit while the company bled money. Each word was a sharp blade, slicing away the last vestiges of dignity Constance was trying to maintain. The few guests still remaining in the ballroom were witnessing the public autopsy of a dynasty. You have no right to judge me, Constance said, but her voice came out weak, unconvincing. I did what was necessary to maintain the family's position in society. The Astor name means something in this city. Meant, Madison corrected brutally. Now it means debt, mismanagement, and arrogance. In 6 months, when the news of this acquisition becomes public, it will mean failure. Unless I can rewrite the narrative, turn this into something positive, and to do that I need radical changes. Richard pushed himself away from the chair he was leaning on and stood between the 2 women, his eyes moving desperately between them. Madison, please. She's my mother. She made mistakes, yes, but you can't just... She can't be kicked out of everything she helped build. There has to be another way. Madison looked at her husband, and for a moment something softened in her expression. Richard, I understand your loyalty. It's one of the things I love about you. But that blind loyalty is part of the problem. You knew your mother was making terrible decisions. You saw the numbers, you saw the bills, you saw the auditor's warnings, and what did you do? Nothing. Because confronting her would mean admitting the Empress had no clothes. I tried, Richard protested weakly. Several times I tried to talk to her about... Madison cut him off with a wave of her hand. Trying is not the same as doing. Talking is not the same as acting. You had access to the financial records. You had a seat on the board of directors. You could have forced an intervention, demanded an independent audit, threatened to resign publicly if things didn't change. But you didn't, because that would have required courage you didn't have. The blow hit Richard visibly, physically. He recoiled as if he'd been slapped. His face went through several shades of red before paling completely. Around them, the ballroom had emptied significantly. Perhaps 60 guests remained, those too curious or too invested in the drama to leave. Among them, Madison recognized a few society columnists, people who would turn this night into headlines by morning. Dr. Julia Sanders consulted her watch, a discreet but very expensive Rolex. CEO, Madison, it is 11:10 p.m. We need to finalize the terms and get the signatures if we want to file everything before the banks open. Our lawyers are on standby at the notary's office, but time is running out. Madison nodded, but she didn't take her eyes off Richard. I'm going to sign the documents, she said calmly. The acquisition will proceed. But first, I need you to make a choice, Richard. A real choice. Not one of your attempts to please everyone that always end up pleasing no one. What choice? Richard asked, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. Madison squared her shoulders, and in that moment she was no longer the humiliated wife with wine on her dress. She was the CEO who commanded billions, the woman who had built an empire from scratch, the force of nature who had walked into that ballroom hiding her true power. You choose between your mother and this company, between the past and the future, between the illusion of grandeur and the reality of rebuilding. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the most distant guests stopped whispering. Constance was completely still, her eyes fixed on her son, her entire posture screaming a silent command. Richard looked between the 2 women who defined his life, trapped in a snare he had helped build with years of indecision and complacency. If you choose your mother, Madison continued, her voice remaining calm and rational, I will still sign the documents. Horizon will still buy the company and pay the debts. Your family will still receive the $200 million. But you and I will be over. Our marriage ends tonight. And more importantly, you will have no role in the new corporate structure. You will be just another ex-executive from a failed family living off money that will last at most 15 years if managed carefully, less if you maintain your current lifestyle. Richard grew even paler, if that was possible. And if I choose... He couldn't finish the sentence. Madison did it for him. If you choose the company, if you choose me, then you stay on as Chief Operating Officer under my supervision. You work with me to rebuild what your family destroyed. But your mother is out, completely. No board position, no executive voice, no access to corporate decisions. She can keep her share of the $200 million. She can live comfortably. But her influence over the company ends here and now. You can't make me choose like this, Richard said, and there was real desperation in his voice. She's my mother. She humiliated you, Madison replied simply. In front of 150 people, she threw wine on me, called me an opportunist, sent me to the kitchen. And what did you do? You mumbled a weak apology and tried to drag me away. You didn't defend me. You didn't confront her. You did nothing except feel shame and helplessness. Constance finally found her, voice though it came out hoarse and broken. Richard, you will not choose this. This woman over your own mother, over your family, over your blood. She's blackmailing us, don't you see? She's using the situation to destroy everything we are. Madison turned to Constance with an expression that could freeze fire. I'm not destroying anything, Mrs. Astor. You already did that yourself. I am merely forcing everyone here to face the consequences of their choices, and giving your son a chance to be part of the solution instead of continuing to be part of the problem. Dr. Paul stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. With all due respect to everyone involved, the emotional aspects of this situation, while understandable, are secondary to the financial reality. We have contracts that need to be signed, documents that need to be filed, and wire transfers that need to be processed. If we don't finalize this in the next few hours, the window closes. The bank executes the debt at 9 a.m. Everything we're discussing becomes irrelevant because there will be nothing left to save. Madison looked at her CFO and nodded. You're right, Dr. Mason. We've wasted enough time. She turned to Richard. You have 2 minutes to decide. Either you stand with me and build a future, or you stand with your mother and manage the decline. There is no middle ground. No compromise. That's the reality of business, Richard. Decisions have to be made, and they have consequences. Constance grabbed her son's arm, her red-painted nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. Richard, for all that is holy, don't let her do this. She's manipulating you. In a month, she'll get tired of you and you'll be stuck in a company that's no longer yours, married to a woman who publicly humiliated you. I am your mother, your blood, your family. This woman is a nobody. This woman, Madison said calmly, is the only reason you'll still have a roof over your head tomorrow. This woman is offering your son a chance to prove he's more than a useless heir waiting for an inheritance. She looked directly at Richard. But maybe your mother is right. Maybe you don't have enough courage to make the right choice. Maybe you are exactly the weak man she raised you to be. The taunt was calculated, precise, designed to provoke a reaction. And it worked. Richard pulled his arm from Constance's grasp, taking a step back. His eyes, which had been filled with tears and confusion, began to clear. No, he said, and his voice came out firmer than before. No, I'm not weak, and I'm not the man my mother wants me to be. Richard, Constance began, real alarm coloring her voice now. I'm sorry, Mother, Richard said, turning to face her fully for the first time. I love you, but you're wrong. About Madison, about me, about everything. He took a deep breath, and Madison could see the physical effort it was costing him to finally confront the woman who had dominated his entire life. You humiliated my wife, the woman I love, and I stood there and let it happen because I was afraid. Afraid of you. Afraid of losing your love. Afraid to admit you were wrong. Constance's eyes widened in growing shock and horror. You don't know what you're saying. She's poisoned you against me. Richard cut her off, his voice rising. She built an empire while you destroyed ours. She hid herself, lived like an ordinary person, let you treat her like dirt all, to give me a chance to prove I was worth more than my last name. And I failed. I failed spectacularly, but I won't fail anymore. He turned to Madison, and there was something different in his eyes now. Determination, perhaps, or desperation transformed into resolution. I choose you. I choose the company. I choose a future instead of a glorified past. And I choose to finally be the man you deserve. He held out his hand. Give me the pen. I'll sign as a witness. I'll make sure everything you planned happens. Madison studied her husband for a long moment, looking for signs of hesitation or future regret. What she saw was a man finally waking from a decades-long dream, a man making the first real decision of his life. She reached into the briefcase and pulled out a gold pen, heavy and cool. But before she handed it to him, she looked one last time at Constance. You will still receive your share of the 200 million, Mrs. Astor. You can keep this mansion for another 6 months, while you find something smaller. I'm not cruel, but your influence over this company and over your son ends. Now, Constance didn't answer. She simply looked at Richard with an expression of betrayal so profound that several people in the room made sounds of discomfort. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the stairs leading to the second floor. Her steps echoed on the marble, each one sounding like a funeral drum. No one tried to stop her. No one said anything as she disappeared into the upper hallway, leaving behind a ballroom full of silent witnesses to her total defeat. Madison handed the pen to Richard, their hands touching briefly. Are you sure? She asked softly, just for him to hear. Because after we sign this, there's no going back. The life you knew is over. I know, Richard answered, and there was a peace in his voice now, the peace of someone who has finally stopped running. Maybe it should have been over a long time ago. Dr. Julia Sanders opened her own briefcase and began removing documents, stacking them methodically on a side table that had previously held empty champagne flutes. Dr. Paul and Dr. Frederick joined her, transforming that corner of the opulent ballroom into a temporary office. The few remaining guests watched. From a distance, silent witnesses to the moment of family dynasty became just another line item in the corporate records of Horizon Investments. Madison walked to the table, her heels still echoing in the heavy silence, the wine stain on her dress glowing under the crystal chandeliers like a red constellation. Richard followed her, holding the gold pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked at the documents Dr. Julia was arranging, pages and pages of dense legal language, clauses and sub-clauses that turned decades of family history into cold, precise financial transactions. These are the main contracts, Doctor, Julia explained, pointing to different stacks. Stock acquisition, property transfer, debt assumption, payment terms, restructuring timeline. Each document will require the signatures of CEO Madison, Mr. Richard Astor, as the legal representative of the family, and 3 witnesses. She gestured to the 2 other executives. Dr. Mason and Dr. Cole will serve as 2 of the witnesses. We need a third party with no direct corporate affiliation. A man stepped forward from the small crowd of onlookers. Madison recognized him as Dr. Albert Mendoza, a renowned corporate lawyer who was likely at the party representing a client. I can serve as the third witness, he offered, his voice professional but not unsympathetic. I am neutral in this transaction, and my signature carries legal weight. Dr. Julia nodded in approval. Madison took the first pen, a black Mont Blanc that Dr. Paul offered her, and paused over the first document. She looked at Richard, who stood pale but steady beside her. There's something you need to know, she said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. When I found out Astor Holdings was in negotiations with Horizon, when I saw it was your family company, I could have recused myself. I could have passed the case to another executive, but I didn't. Why? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. Madison met his eyes. Because I needed to know. I needed to understand if you were capable of growing beyond what your family made you. If there was a real person under all the layers of privilege and expectation. She touched his face gently. And now I know. You're stronger than you think, Richard. You just needed a big enough reason to prove it. Tears welled in his eyes, but Richard didn't let them fall. Instead, he covered Madison's hand with his own. I should have defended you, At that first party when my mother belittled you, at every dinner where my family treated you as an inferior, today, when she threw wine on you. I should have stood by you from the beginning." His voice broke slightly. "Can I fix this?" Madison smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. "You've already started. The rest will take time, but we have time now." She turned to the documents. "We're going to save your family company. Or rather, we're going to build something new from the ashes of what it was." The pen touched the paper, and Madison began to sign. Her name flowed across each document with the authority of someone who had done this hundreds of times, closing deals that moved mountains of capital, changing the destinies of entire companies. Madison Taylor, CEO, Horizon Investments Americas. Each signature was a hammer blow, sealing the Astor's fate, transforming pride into pragmatism, arrogance into forced humility. Richard signed next, his hand trembling slightly, but his signature remaining firm. Richard August Astor, Jr., legal representative, Astor family. Madison watched as he paused after writing the surname, as if considering the weight of those letters, the entire legacy they carried, and were now transferring to more capable hands. The three witnesses signed in sequence, and Dr. Julia gathered all the documents in meticulous order. "Done," she announced, checking her watch again. 11:42 p.m. Our lawyers at the notary's office are authorized to work through the night. These documents will be filed before 6 a.m., and the wire transfers will be processed as soon as the system opens at 9. She looked at Madison. "Astor Holdings officially becomes a subsidiary of Horizon Investments in exactly," she calculated mentally, 7 hours and 18 minutes. Madison nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. 7 hours and 18 minutes until 3 generations of family history became a footnote in a larger corporate report. But also, 7 hours and 18 minutes before a new era began, a chance to rebuild with competence what had been destroyed by incompetence. The Horizon executives began packing the documents into their briefcases, preparing to leave. The helicopter was still waiting on the south helipad, its rotors silent but ready to fly back to the company headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Madison looked around the ballroom that hours earlier had been filled with guests celebrating an engagement that now felt like it had happened in another life, another world. The few remaining guests finally began to leave, some stopping to offer awkward congratulations, others simply disappearing into the night without a word. Dr. Albert Mendoza shook Madison's hand before he left. "It was an honor to witness this," he said simply. "You did more for justice in this room tonight than many courts manage in years." When the last guest had departed, the ballroom was empty except for Madison, Richard, the 3 Horizon executives, and Eleanor, who had appeared silently to begin cleaning up the party's aftermath. The housekeeper looked at Madison with an expression that was hard to decipher, somewhere between admiration and sorrow. "Do you need anything before you leave, Mom?" she asked. Madison looked at the woman who had tried to help her hours earlier, who had offered towels and a clean dress, who had shown kindness when no one else would. "Thank you, Eleanor, for your kindness today. I won't forget it. When the restructuring begins, your position is secure. In fact, I'd like to promote you to manager of all properties. You deserve authority that matches your competence." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you can imagine." She glanced at Richard, then back at Madison. "Will you be changing your dress before you leave? I can find something suitable." Madison looked down at the wine-stained dress, at the white silk ruined by the violent red that now seemed like an intentional part of the design. "No," she replied firmly. "I'll go like this. This stain," she touched the fabric gently, "is my reminder, my proof, my victory. I want to arrive at Horizon headquarters exactly like this, so everyone can see what happens when someone tries to diminish me." Richard stepped forward, his hands finding hers. "Can I go with you? To headquarters? I know I don't officially work for you yet, not until the transaction is finalized, but I want to be there. I want to see you in your element, to understand the world you built while I was blind to everything." Madison considered, then nodded. "You can come. But Richard," she squeezed his hands, We need to establish something clearly. In the office, I am your boss, not your wife, not your partner, your superior. You will take orders. You will be questioned. You will have to prove your worth every single day. No privileges for being my husband. No special treatment. Do you understand that? I understand, Richard replied, and there was renewed determination in his voice. I want that. I want to earn my place through work, not through connections. I want you to teach me how to be the kind of executive your company deserves, not the kind who was raised to live off a surname. Madison smiled, and it was a real smile this time, full of possibility and cautious hope. Then, let's go. She turned to her executives. Dr. Mason, Dr. Sanders, Dr. Cole, you can take the helicopter back and ensure everything is processed correctly. Richard and I will go by car. We need to talk, and the New York traffic will give us plenty of time. The three executives nodded, took their briefcases and retreated toward the garden where the helicopter waited. Minutes later, the sound of the rotors cut through the night, growing in intensity before gradually fading as the aircraft rose and disappeared into the dark New York sky, carrying documents that would change everything. Madison and Richard walked together toward the mansion's main exit. At the top of the staircase on the second floor, Madison saw a figure standing in the shadows, Constance watching them in silence. There was no more anger in her posture, just a deep, exhaustive defeat. Madison paused, considering whether to say something to offer some final word, but she decided there was nothing left to be said. Some battles end not with grand pronouncements, but with silence. Outside, Richard's driver was waiting with the car, a black Mercedes that gleamed under the garden lights. He opened the rear door, and Madison got in, Richard following her. The driver asked no questions about the stained dress or the obvious tension that filled the car. He simply drove, guiding them through the streets of the Upper East Side, past sleeping mansions and tree-lined avenues, toward the financial district where Horizon had its headquarters in a modern skyscraper. During the drive, Richard and Madison talked, not about business or corporate strategy, but about them, about the 3 years of marriage where Madison had hidden her true self, about her reasons, about his failings. It was a difficult, painful, but necessary conversation. Tears were shed, truths were spoken, and when the car finally pulled up in front of the mirrored Horizon building, something had shifted between them. Not a complete reconciliation, but the beginning of one. Madison stepped out of the car and looked up at the 40 stories of glass and steel that rose against the New York night sky. Her empire, her creation, her legacy. And now, with Astor Holdings under her management, another step on a ladder she had started climbing years ago, when she decided she would never be defined by the expectations of others, only by her own. Richard stood beside her, looking at the same building with a mixture of awe and intimidation. "It's bigger than I imagined," he said softly. "All this, everything you built, and you never said a word." Madison looked at him. "I didn't need to. My work speaks for me." And she gestured to the wine-stained dress, now an armor she wore with pride, just like her scars. "This speaks too, loud and clear." They walked into the deserted lobby together, their footsteps echoing on the polished marble. The night security guard greeted them respectfully, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Madison's dress but being too professional to comment. The elevators whisked them upward, toward the 40th floor where Madison's executive office was, where decisions that moved billions were made daily. When the elevator doors opened, revealing a modern space of glass and steel with panoramic views of New York, Madison turned to Richard one last time. "Welcome to my world," she said simply. "I hope you're ready to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." Richard smiled, and it was a smile of determination and hope. "I'm ready. Teach me. Show me how to build something real."